Welcome everyone to Haven of Horror. As always, I'm Subject. We've got Robert, and returning to the channel after a long hiatus is the Day Ghost. Welcome back.
Has it been a long hiatus?
So we are here to start our Decades of Horror series that we're doing. Each of us picked a decade. Austin, you picked the 50s. I don't know if you remember both of your picks, but you picked this and Creature from the Black Lagoon.
That sounds about right.
Creature was for a commentary. So I didn't ask anybody else this, but it just popped in my head. What made you pick the 50s and the films that you did?
I think Robert took the one I really wanted, so I was like, well, I guess I'll pick the 50s.
The 90s?
Oh, never mind then. Someone picked the one I wanted.
You hate the 90s. B, you picked yours like a month behind I did, because I'm a procrastinating motherfucker.
No, Robert.
Okay, then maybe Noah took the one.
Maybe Robert.
Someone took it.
Because Noah was the 70s. That might have been what you.
Noah took it.
No, Robert picked his like a week ago.
Ah, goddamn. That's where you got stuck with the fucking 90s.
True. You picked the 50s, Noah got the 70s, you know.
Yeah, now we're jumping 2020. Yeah, so I wanted the 70s, couldn't get it, so I went, okay, what will I do then? I will go with the 50s then. And then my go-to for 50s horror is one of my favorites of the decade is Creature. And I know we did a review of that, because the original Decades of Horror thing, I put together completely for John. And I think that was the movie I picked for the 50s then. So I was like, let's do a commentary of it. And then I picked Rodan because it's the only way this movie was going to be covered. And Rodan's a great movie. Yeah, somewhere down the line. And Rodan's a great movie, so I wanted to get it in there.
Yeah, so
it's kind of in a weird place where it's just after Godzilla, so it's outshined by that, and it's right before the big boom of Showa era kaiju film, so it's also kind of outshadowed by that. So it's kind of in this exact middle place where it's the big things are before and after it. He's stuck in the middle with them.
Yeah, so it should be mentioned that this whole Decades of Horror thing, sorry, Robert, real quick, before we get into the full review, is this whole thing, the credit does go to Austin, because I'm just kind of taking his idea and changing it a little bit, where we do...
As you should, it's a great idea for October.
It's a great idea, yeah, so thank you for that. But anyway, Robert, go ahead and tell us your experience with Rodan and what you're going to say.
Well, I was just going to say that, this isn't even remembered as much as something like Mothra. Mothra's probably the most iconic after Godzilla. And so I went to this kind of blind, where I knew it existed, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. I love the original Godzilla. I'm not a big kaiju guy, not as much as you guys are. There's still many I need to see. I've got a friend who's recommended me a bunch of specific Godzilla movies. I still need to go through that list. I own a Blu-ray copy of Shin Godzilla. I still need to watch it. But I love Godzilla -1. That was my favorite movie of last year. So, and I have seen the original Godzilla, which is great. I don't think this is as good as that. But it's still absolutely. It's still pretty fun. I was most honestly captivated by the opening with just how seriously they play it. Before the big monsters actually show up. This is a really dark, oppressive tone to it early on. I love the music. The music's one of my favorite things about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just like the tone a lot. And probably my biggest surprise with this when you get to the end is just how much Godzilla 2014 is pulling from this movie. With the reveal with what we do with the monsters and everything. And I was like, oh, this is and it made me wonder why did we just make up the Mutos? Why wasn't that just Rodan in that movie?
Well, especially because everyone thought the one kind of was like a Rodan, the flying one. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that we've never gone back to, and I've always wondered why. I was saying this to John, and I said it after -1 came out. I want to see Toho go back and do that kind of a remake for Mothra and for Rodan both. I think that would be wonderful.
That was my big takeaway from this, and it's a praise. It's not a criticism, but I want to see the Godzilla -1 guys handle this material. Like, I would like to see this be remade or
Mm.
updated.
Well,
I think that'd be really cool.
mhm, absolutely. Well, we should mention this was directed by Ishirō Honda, who did the original Godzilla and Mothra, and
Yeah,
like a ton of monster movies.
well, based on my 5 seconds of research on this movie, to my understanding, this is the first, at least big Japanese kaiju film in color. Because the
Yes.
first two Godzilla movies are black and white, and then we don't get King Kong versus Godzilla until what, the 60s, or is that late? So
Yes,
this is
because
right in the middle.
I think Mothra comes first. I think Mothra's 61, and then you have King Kong vs. Godzilla, I think 63.
And for the most part, like, this is a good looking movie.
Mhm.
I was really taken with like a lot of the set design and the shots and stuff. Like, it is a well directed movie. You can tell this is the same guy behind Godzilla. Like, there are some good shots.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the effects work's really good, and I have to imagine must have been a pain in the ass because it's not just a man in a suit walking around destroying
Mhm.
things. You have a lot of like wind pushing things up. I forget the exact quote. It was killing me trying to think of what it was today. But there's like a big Ishiro Honda quote where he talks about monsters and how they're um, so huge that like a lot of the destruction that they cause is just by existing. Like it's not even always intentional. And I think Rodan more than Godzilla really amplifies that, in that
Mhm.
Rodan moving destroys things. Like Rodan's not going out of its way. Neither of them, because like you kind of hinted at, there's two Rodans in this movie, and neither of them are really going out of their way to destroy cities. But like just flying causes hurricanes.
Mhm. Which is a thing they will bring back in presumably the other movies, and also the
Yeah.
American Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 2018 2019 one, because that is a big Rodan set piece where he's like causing a big
Yeah.
hurricane.
No, that is a big Rodan thing. Is that you'll have like him fly by, and then the shot of like cars being pushed away.
Which is really cool. And again, where I'm like, oh man, I want to see the Godzilla -1 guys tackle this. Just imagine people just getting flown around into glass windows and stuff, just like with all the wind, like all
Yeah.
the effects you could do. You did some really cool, scary stuff with this.
Well, and even with King of the Monsters, I think that's part of why the Rodan sequence is like a big fan favorite set
Mhm.
piece of that movie. Uh, like, there's so much you can do with him. He's such a great monster.
Mhm. Yeah, he's a big pterodactyl.
Yeah, exactly. And him chasing planes is fun. Him just flying by places is cool.
No, the whole final set piece is really fun, and I would say, like, obviously this movie is not anywhere near like on the level of the original Godzilla, but in a few places, just on a technical level, it's impressive just how much more complicated this movie had to be to make, with all the the flying puppets and suits and all that. Uh, Robert,
Mhm.
you went to Godzilla 2014. The thing that stood out to me the most is in that flashback where Rodan hatches and like that pilot that miner's like stuck in the ground with all those worms. I was thinking Jackson's King Kong, because that scene reminds me
Oh,
a
cool.
lot of the scene where they're like fighting off the worms and stuff.
Mhm.
Did you have that, Austin? Because you know those movies better than I do.
Not specifically, but like these guys love King Kong. Like, and that's I don't know if it would have been as common knowledge back then, but that is like famously a deleted sequence from the
Mhm.
original. So,
Oh, okay.
it is possible that they were inspired by that. Like, go watch the original Mothra. That movie is like King Kong in Japan. Like the plot of that movie is a group of guys find an island, discover fairies, and then like bring them back to Japan to like put on as a show. Uh, and then obviously Mothra is connected to them, and it ends up being a whole thing. But
That's really
Well,
funny.
I will say, part of what's interesting about this is you get multiple monsters. It's not really the Rodan show until the last third. Like, it's a
I
really
was
slow
gonna
build up.
ask you, as somebody coming into this completely blind, Robert, like, how did that play for you? Because it is I think really effective. Obviously, you know what Rodan is, but uh, for newcomers, and that it kind of has that alien thing where it's like if you
Mm.
don't know what this monster is, it's like constantly shifting. Like even when we get to Rodan, it's a baby, and then we get to the full Rodan, and then we have there's two of them, and we start with those insect creatures. Like it's kind of always moving in that.
There's probably a name for this trope, and it's killing me that I can't think of a direct comparison, but I know I've seen this before where you have these monsters, these giant, like they call them larvae, or like these big like caterpillar or worm things that are killing people. It's like, okay, now you see how strong and hard it is to kill these things and how much of a problem they are. And now we get to the real monster and it's just eating them and they are not a problem anymore.
They
So
basically
it's like
just
I know I've
exist
seen
to
that
feed this
before.
thing. Yeah, they
Mm,
get warped.
yeah. And I will say that's the stuff in the movie where it's like there is that goofy charm to it, but it's also like, oh man, this is a lot scarier and cooler when they were off screen because it's just guys in suits. And it is what it is. Rodan, I think, is pretty cool and pretty impressive for what they could do for the time. But I will say that those early creatures don't hold up great. It's part of the charm. Like it's fun. It's
Yeah.
just, but when it's off screen, I was like, oh, this has like a really scary, dark tone. They talk about one of the victims, like the first dead body we find when we pull him out of the water. Like the blood looks very realistic. And then like the scene where they're hosing down the body and talking about it, it's done very bluntly and surprisingly matter of factly, like for the 50s. It's not just, oh, he's dead. It's like, no, you see blood and like it looks convincing. And they talk
Mhm.
about another guy who died where they're like, oh yeah, his head was off and it was just being held by skin. And it's just like that's a really grisly description for a movie. You don't see it, but it sticks with
Yeah.
you. Like that's good stuff.
hmm
Oh,
No,
that's great.
absolutely. No, I think that's one of the biggest strengths this movie has is just that, like, constantly keeping you guessing on a first
Mm.
viewing. Like, it's very mysterious in that way. Where obviously, like Godzilla, you get to him. I think the first time you see him is like 20 minutes in, and like that's much more of like, vengeance is coming to you, like coming after you. Well, this is much more, we don't even really understand what's happening. Like
Mm.
even after the insect thing, we're getting Rodan flying around, and there's a lot of like, there's something flying around. We don't even know what it is. It's like we can't even keep up with it.
It's UFO.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
that,
Which is all. So I was saying this to John. Like I've always heard, one of the big inspirations for this is the fear of like the kind of Russian American stuff right at that point. We're like, oh, could we end up in war between them? And on a first viewing, I was like, I don't entirely see it. On a second viewing, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
mm. Yeah, and I
It's like
think a
that is
lot.
all of that. There's like something flying. Like it's the rockets, right?
And I think a lot of that stuff I probably didn't pick up on as much or could appreciate more on a second viewing because this movie's not in your face as much as a Godzilla is with like that movie's commentary, what it's about, even though you still get the nuclear testing. Like that's still a part of the plot here.
Mhm.
Which it's just funny that these two things are gonna cross over later when in this movie they never say, hey, it's like that big lizard that tore up Tokyo. You think someone would bring that up. But th- and again, I don't mean that as a criticism because I adore Godzilla. Like that movie's
Mhm.
great, and I do think this is a step down, just at least in terms of the characters. There's not as much of like that moral, ethical debate that resonates. I don't think the characters are as good as Godzilla because at the end of Godzilla, you get that really great tragedy with the scientist and this movie ends on a surprisingly emotional note where I was like, oh, I kind of wish this had more. I wasn't expecting the tone where this movie ends, and I feel like we could have built up more to that again, maybe with a remake. But like I said, I
Yeah,
still liked it, and there are
it.
things I could pick up on more on a second viewing.
Yeah, I would say the big thing that's always stuck with me is I first saw this is the ending. It's a very powerful ending.
Mm-hmm.
It I agree because I do feel like that ending is maybe better than the overall package. Like it kind of bumps it up a little bit better. In that way, it kind of reminds me of Son of Godzilla, where that movie's very silly, but it has like a final shot that like kind of gives me chills, and I'm like, oh, like that's such a powerful way to end
Mm-hmm.
your film, and like so it like kind of bumps it up a notch. And this is a way better movie than son of Godzilla. You know what I mean? Like it's just. Although, so this was the first time I'd ever seen the dub, and it's been a while since I've seen it subbed. That was just like the only way I could find it today. I have a question. When they play that sequence, like it's just music over it, right? Like you're watching that scene. Yeah, that's how I remembered it. The American dubbing is so bad.
Oh
for
no!
that sequence.
Is there narration?
It's like a Wonder Years speech where it's like it cuts to the guy and he's like holding the woman. It was in that moment that I realized I was holding the woman I loved, and that I
Oh
watched
no, they Harrison Forded it.
and I watched as the Rodan slowly watched its loved one die, and I wondered, could there be a day where I die as well? And like, that's actually a thing. That's actually a thing he says. By the way, that is like, that's not me exaggerating. Uh, and it goes through the entire sequence, and I was like, this is still a beautiful sequence, but they're doing everything they can to ruin it, and they like explain exactly what's happening, where it's like the one Rodan finally fell, but the other one, it knew it couldn't go on without it, so while it struggled, it didn't fight to leave.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You get that all. You get that all visually. You know, the one
Yeah.
could have gone away, but it didn't. It went back to its mate.
Yeah.
To protect
It's such a
it.
beautiful
It's really
ending.
sad.
I was just about to ask
Mhm.
you how the dub was because I didn't watch the dub for this one. Was that the worst
The
part?
dub-
Like it was okay other than that, or
There's a lot of narration that I don't think's needed, but like if you're into 50s sci-fi horror, you're probably not gonna mind it.
But it's just narration, right? There aren't like extensive reshoots and added characters like you get in the American
Yeah,
version of Godzilla.
No, it was more so just kind of like added dialogue stuff.
Because when I watched it, it was just the subtitle one, which is probably considered like the definitive version.
Yeah.
But on Max, which is where I watched it, it was actually specifically the version from the Criterion collection, because the Criterion logo came up out front. I was like, oh, cool! This isn't like some crappy DVD rip from 20 years ago. I didn't know that Criterion did that. I didn't know they let their versions out to other streaming services. So that was a nice surprise.
Yeah.
It looked great.
yeah, you can buy that
uh,
Showa box set on Vudu.
Well, Rodan's not in that though.
Right,
but,
I just make Criterion movies on digital.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. I mean, that makes more sense though. No, the one I had was a dub and a really shitty transfer.
Oh
When, like,
no!
where the color grading was like different from shot to shot, where it's like one shot is everything's blue, the next shot everything's orange, and I was like, it's a good thing I've seen this before. Like I already know it's a really good movie. Like I know that it's just this version I'm watching is kind of wonky.
That's probably not a version that gets re-released a lot.
Probably not.
Yeah, just that's what Tubi was stuck with.
Yeah, because like, does that Criterion set have the American version of Godzilla?
Yes, that is both cuts.
Okay.
I couldn't remember if it was. Is it? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the criteria. I mean, I have it. I could look at it.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that includes.
Yes. Oh, okay. Same here. See, I think you're right. It's just I've never watched the American cut.
Yeah, I haven't either. I've just watched the Japanese one.
Yeah.
Really no need.
So, the reason why I wasn't sure is because some of the ones that are really bad dubs, they don't even include them in that set. Like, you're not getting Gigantus, the fire dragon, on the same disc as Raids Again.
I can see the excuse for releasing the Godzilla one because it's at the end of the day that's almost like a separate film.
Yeah, it's a fundamentally different cut. You know,
it's not just like a.
Well, it probably makes for like a cooler watch if you watch that and Return of Godzilla back to back because they bring back the guy they add to the original. Steve Martin. That's also a good movie.
But no, so to Robert, you mentioned earlier like the blood. This is a really bloody movie in places compared to other movies in the genre that I've seen. I like kaiju movies. I have far less experience in the genre than Austin is. He has seen way more than me. Is this one of the bloodier kaiju films that you've seen?
Um, I don't know. Some of them get like pretty bloody. Like you'd be surprised. And some of the
I think when you
slower
get to the
Godzilla films get
70s,
really.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think when you get to the
exactly.
late 60s, a couple are like shockingly bad. I'm going through this hearsay.
No, no, I mean
Uh,
that basically is. I think like maybe more so 70s, but you do have a weird thing where it becomes more childish, but like we also shove in blood here and there.
this also made me wonder though, because I don't know if this movie's any more violent than the first Godzilla, but that's in black and white, so it makes you wonder. It made me wonder, like, how some of those sequences in the first Godzilla would look in color, like what the fake
Mhm.
blood looked like. You know, if they tried to
Yeah,
make it real, even though it was black and white, or if they just used, chocolate syrup, like other movies did. But like that is
yeah.
also a very violent movie.
No, I agree. And no, I was thinking about it today because Ishirō Honda is like famously a pacifist, and I was just kind of laughing where I was like, oh, but he like totally owns some of that violent stuff on film.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Um, some of just the shot, like the scenes too of the army fighting Rodan. I feel like some people could maybe think are boring, like they go on for a while, but like they're so
Mhm.
cool.
I love the miniatures.
Yeah,
Again, it's all part of the charm. You just need to be in the right headspace for it. But
yeah.
there are a couple shots of Rodan taking off where you can see the wire, and I'm like, oh,
Well, not only that, but there's like shots where you can see the actors like, oh shit, they're dropping me. Because those suits are like kind of famously hard to see in. So it's
Mhm.
like there's moments where you can tell like Rodan's coming down and the actor's like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I gotta
S-
make sure I'm landing on my feet here. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's the same actor that played Godzilla that plays Rodan in this.
Oh, cool.
There's a lot of that, and I think I remember hearing that he had to give up doing Rodan for Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster where they finally meet, but I could be mixing it up with a different one.
so yes, he played Godzilla not only in the original, but he played him until Godzilla versus Gigan.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Get out of here, Colin Farrell, complaining about makeup and costumes.
No, and I think he almost drowned in one of the movies too in the
Yeah.
suit. Wild. No, I was thinking about it today too, like just going back to that mindset or like time period. Uh, it must have been so amazing, like if you're following this stuff at the time, getting to Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, where it's like Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan, who all had like their own really cool movies,
Mhm.
are here together now, like on screen. That must have been really cool to see.
He
Because
also
now,
played the
obviously, like
larva version of Mothra. In
Oh,
Mothra.
okay, yeah. Because I feel like at this point, Mothra and Rodan are just kind of known as like Godzilla side
Mhm.
uh, creatures, but like, they started with their own movies. Mothra got a trilogy in the '90s. I wish Rodan could get another movie.
I'd love that. I'd also love just another Mothra movie. That'd be cool. Austin, you can correct me on this. Is Gamera the big one that never officially crosses over with Godzilla, or is there a Godzilla versus Gamera? Or
So
is
it
it?
never happened, but they're owned by a different company.
Okay,
So it's like something that's kind of always been talked about.
but that had a big, like, long running series, right? Like, aren't there a bunch of those?
Yeah, I think there's 8. Like it's not as long as Godzilla, but I think Godzilla is actually the longest running for of all time. I think it has the record for that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and one of the big beloved Godzilla movies, Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Say that 5 times fast.
We don't make
Is
titles like that anymore.
exactly is directed by the guy who like made the reboot uh, Gamera trilogy like right before that.
Oh, cool.
It's like you have like some crossover with things like that, but not the actual characters. One day it'll happen, I'm sure.
And is Anguirus is that like the first one that he fights? Is that one of the early ones?
That's
Yeah, he's
the second
he's
one.
the enemy.
And
Yeah,
everyone
he's the
forgets
enemy in the second
Anguirus.
movie. I
That
love
was just
Anguirus.
forgotten.
Well, his dead body is in King of the Monsters. That's all you get. He's dead. But it's also kind of fitting because I love Angus, but like his entire character is that he's a giant bitch. Like even in Godzilla Raids Again, like he's the enemy monster and he gets killed like middle of the second act. Like he doesn't even make it to the end.
I still didn't see that one. I still haven't seen Godzilla Raids Again.
Raids Again is, I think, one of the weaker movies. It's not great, but
but anyway, Rodan. Even in his own review, Rodan's played second fiddle to Godzilla.
we still talk a lot about Rodan.
But what I like about this movie versus like the Godzilla films that I've seen, because my main experience with Kaiju as Godzilla is this is kind of like the humans tracking the monster, whereas in Godzilla movies they don't usually track Godzilla, at least not for long.
There's a little bit of that in the first one. There are some similar plot beats in this structurally where it's like, oh, this is like that scene in Godzilla when they're trying to figure out like what the creature is and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like they took like an element of Godzilla and kind of ramped it up a little bit because there is definitely a lot more of that in this movie than in some of the Godzilla movies.
It's also funny when they're like, oh, it's a pteranodon or whatever. I'm like, no, it's fucking not. It's a thing with Godzilla where isn't there a line in Godzilla where like, oh, it's like a big T-Rex, and they pull a picture. I'm like, that's not what a T-Rex looks like. I mean, like, there's like that.
Well, the best is in the American dub of Raids Again, where they're like, oh, like it's like a Gigantosaurus or like whatever. So I guess it's Gigantus.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's great.
But yeah, I was completely blindsided when there were two Rodans in this, something they would never do again. And I was like, oh, I didn't know we were doing that in this movie. That's really cool.
No, it is really neat going back, especially like with the history of the series, because you're not expecting that. Like you're going, well, there's Rodan, like there's the one. Mothra we're much more used to with that, with the babies, but not Rodan.
Austin, I don't remember if we asked you this up front, but you know, you're the big Kaiju guy here. Do you remember when you first see this? In your relation to like watching other Godzilla movies, like do you remember when you see this one for the first time? It's probably
I
assume.
It was no, it was the sub.
Okay.
No, I see this much more recently. I see this just last year the that John Carpenter Ishirō Honda screening thing. I don't know if you heard about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he did.
Awesome.
He's like the movie host, and he did 4 movies. It was the original Godzilla, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and what was the other one? Oh, War of the Gargantuans. That's what it was. That was also the first time I'd seen War of the Gargantuans. It's really great.
Oh, cool.
And also has a tragic end with 2 monsters, but
like you said, this one's just kind of burdened by being like sandwiched between the really big ones. It's between Godzilla and all the crossovers and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, they made a Rodan movie, but it's actually good. It's worth watching.
No, it's a really good movie sandwiched between like masterpieces, where it's like you're never gonna get the time of day. You're the middle sibling, but
I still think great. I love like the earthquake scene, the miniature of that when all the dirt and stuff falls in. There's still an attention to detail with like the physics and everything, and the scale that, to my understanding, some of the later movies kind of start to lose, where it's like they're just in a big field, they're just in the desert.
that part especially, I was talking to Austin because like I kind of watched it at the perfect time because I've been in a Power Rangers movie, which is giant monsters, giant robots. And when like the earthquake's happening and like the dirt's rising, I was like, oh, Megazord's gonna come out of
No, and to their credit, like they were sometimes pretty good with continuity back then. Like when we see Rodan show up next, it is coming out of a volcano. So like
Oh, cool.
they're at least acknowledging this ending possibly happened, but one of them survived.
They cared more than the Universal monster movies, where you go from one movie of Frankenstein burning to death, and then he's frozen in the next one for some reason.
Although one of the I forget which one it might be Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, or it's Mothra versus Godzilla. It's one of them. One of them opens with Godzilla coming out of the ground for some reason,
As he does.
as he does. Like there's just like characters all standing around, and suddenly the ground starts shaking, and then you just see like Godzilla rise up out of the dirt. And it's very weird.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
That is great. All right. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk about before we kind of move into final thoughts? Is there anything we haven't covered?
Not that I'm thinking.
Like I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but if I had to pick a best thing, like it's the music. I think the music is this the same composer as Godzilla?
Yes, it was
Because
Akira Ifukube.
There's one part of the theme later on where I'm like, oh, this is very Godzilla. Like it's very, some of it's very similar, but the music's great. I really like how scary and imposing it is at the start. So that stuff's good. Austin, I know you're a kaiju guy. Are you like a B movie guy? Like, do you like a lot of 50s movies? Like, how does this rank kind of with that stuff?
I love B movies. 50s B movies. I think I can be a little bit more hit or miss on. Like I watched them for the first time a few months ago, and I was like, "Oh, this is just like a shitty version of Godzilla." But then I watched Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and I was like, "This is great." So a little like more mixed on the 50s specifically with that, but I do love me some B movies. And I don't know, I feel like this ranks pretty high for me. I do think this is genuinely a really good movie. I would probably put Mothra slightly over it, but both are just really good.
Yeah, well, and we're both big Creature from the Black Lagoon fans. I mean, that's one of my favorites.
That's probably my favorite horror film of the decade, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. That's why I keep picking it for the decades of horror first review and commentary.
Yeah, and you got to be there for that commentary. Figure it out.
That's fine. We'll work out time.
Yeah, I like this movie. It doesn't blow my socks off except for that ending. That ending is wonderful. Austin and I have talked about this. I love kaiju movies, but I like the goofier monster fighting ones. Except the original Godzilla. I love the original Godzilla. Like I don't know how you can't if you're into the genre. Rodan is really cool. I love like bird monsters. Like one of my favorite dinosaurs as a kid, or I guess dinosaur like the pterodactyls. Yes, part of that was because of Power Rangers, but whatever. No, I think there's a compelling human element to this with the guy that has the amnesia and whatever. This is a solid movie. I'm gonna give it a 3.5 review. Austin, final thoughts and rating.
Yeah, that's about what I would give it. Is a 3.5. Just overall, just very solid, very good movie. It's sad that it is kind of outclassed in the way it is, but also like that's also like in some ways a good thing in that look at all these great movies that came after it. That it is a part of the legacy of. But I'm glad that we're here to kind of give it its due. Earlier, I was looking up Rodan reviews on YouTube just to see, not to like watch them beforehand, but just to see if there's like a lot of a community there. And there was a thing, ah man,
there was nothing.
Like obviously there's like a couple, but they're all like 3 minutes. Like there's nothing like here's the big passionate discussion of Rodan.
That's what
So
we're here
after
for.
I watched the movie, I did watch James Rolfe's like Monster Madness one. That's like 5 or 10 minutes. So it's not
Okay.
super in depth, but he does really like it. And
Yeah,
he talked
I'd
about that
imagine you
how
would.
it's
Yeah.
like one of the, and he talked about how it's like one of the forgotten ones.
Hmm. Yeah, like even in Honda's own filmography, it's like one of the less talked about.
I will say I don't think it's paced as well as Godzilla. I think that's just a better structured movie. Like this did drag for me in a few places. I don't think I'd rewatch this a whole lot, but like I would rewatch it. It's not a like, oh, I have to own this, but at the same time, like I would watch it again. Like I did like it enough. I'm with you guys. I give this a 3.5. It's really solid.
Exactly. Now we got to come back for the big clash down with Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. That's hitting the 5-star legendary list.
We haven't had one of those in a while.
Is now Austin, you're the kaiju expert. Is Destroy All Monsters the one that's considered overrated or doesn't live up to its title?
Absolutely, it has an amazing
Okay.
climax.
Okay. That's
the
a
issue
general
with
consensus. I see.
The issue with Destroy All Monsters is that it's
doesn't
basically
destroy
the
all
same
monsters.
plot. No, it's that the overall plot is basically the exact same as Invasion of Astro Monster, which is one of the best monster movies ever made. It's amazing. I love it. So it's like, oh, it's like a weaker version of that, but then it also has like a great climax.
But giant monster all-out attack, whatever that title is, that's the must-watch one.
No, you got to say the full thing.
Okay. Well, no, because that is a movie. Is Giant Monsters All Out Attack? But then there's also what is it? I think it's just All Monsters Attack. Like that's a different movie, which is like the most hated Godzilla film ever, and I adore it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's like completely misunderstood.
Is that the one with his son?
His son is in it. It's the one that like. There's the English dub where his son's walking out the kid and he's like, Godzilla thinks I should fight my own battles. That's also one of Ishirō Honda's favorite movies, of the ones he did, and I can see why. But that's for another day. But yes, watch GMK. It's wonderful. Watch Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Watch Invasion of Astro Monster. Watch Mothra versus.
Just watch
Either
all of
Mothra
them.
versus. No, either Mothra versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus Mothra. There's two. Both are really great.
Done. There's like 50 movies.
Exactly. It's the longest running franchise of all time.
We'll get through all of them, Robert. Don't worry. But yeah, that was our Rodan review. Austin, thanks for picking this. I'm glad I got a chance to rewatch it because I also watched it the same way you did, the Carpenter thing. But like, I didn't even remember that I'd watched it, so I'm glad I revisited it.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm glad. I figured this would be like a case where I'm like, oh, this is a great movie, and you guys are like, oh, why'd you make us watch this? So I'm glad you guys dug it.
Yeah, that was fun. I also don't know if I'd watch this a whole lot, but I this is something I'd like to show people. Robert, Austin, as always, it's been a pleasure. If you're watching this video and you like this content, hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button, and we will see you guys on the next one.